An American man, tired of his life in New York City, finds himself settling in a village during his travels across India. There he meets three young women, navigates cultural differences and prejudice, and ultimately builds a family in a place where polygyny, unthinkable back in New York, is both accepted and practiced, allowing him to start anew. Before we dive into this story, please like and subscribe to support more content. I no longer want my youth and soul consumed by this lifeless city, muttered 52-year-old Ethan Reed as he wandered alone through the narrow, deserted alleys flanked by towering glass structures in Midtown New York. After graduating from a prestigious university, he had joined a tech firm many envied, but it had given him nothing but endless isolation and apathy. The relentless overtime, harsh criticism from his boss, and the never-ending stream of reports and proposals left him feeling numb. Life felt meaningless. Some might say, "You're well paid." Isn't this just privileged whining? Yet something vital had long since withered inside Ethan. At over 40 years old, without any meaningful romantic experiences, he was haunted by the thought that life is lived only once. What if I die like this, having accomplished nothing? The sudden dread shook him. Then, one day he resigned. After submitting his resignation, he returned home, resolved to leave, though with no clear destination in mind. Strangely, India surfaced. In his thoughts, since childhood, he had heard stories of Himalayan treks, the sacred Ganges, spice-laden alleyways, vibrant saris, in a mysterious land where Buddhism and Hinduism coexisted. Maybe India would open a new door for me, he thought. So he booked a ticket and packed lightly. His years of savings were substantial. Let me truly live for once. And so, without looking back, he departed for India. He never imagined the life that awaited him. The moment Ethan stepped off the plane at Delhi airport, a wave of heat struck him. The air was unlike anything in New York, thick with dust and the sharp aroma of spices. As he rushed to find transportation, swarms of taxi drivers and vendors encircled him, all eager to know where he wanted to go. Overwhelmed yet oddly exhilarated, he thought, "I've really made it this far." He spent a few days touring Delhi, visiting the usual tourist spots, the Red Fort, the chaotic blend of cars and English-filled streets, and cows roaming freely, fascinated him. But Ethan yearned for something deeper, more immersive experience. He wanted to leave behind the city and discover a place where traditions and culture remained vibrant, and where foreigners rarely ventured through traveler rumors and online forums. He received recommendations to explore India's northeast, region far removed from Delhi, Mumbai, or Agra and its famed Taj Mahal. Here, various tribes and ethnic minorities coexisted, preserving their distinctive customs. That's it. A spark lit up in his mind. Ethan promptly booked a train ticket and embarked on the lengthy journey to the northeastern state. During the long train ride, he napped, laughed, and conversed with unfamiliar passengers to pass the time. Several locals curiously asked him, "Why have you come to such a remote place?" Though stumbling over his English, Ethan Reed replied that he wanted to find a new life, a new possibility. People looked at him with curious expressions. The village he arrived at was even more remote than he expected, humid and hot dirt and tree-lined. Roads twisted through streets dotted with small pink-hued houses. Most importantly, the residents lived in an environment where ethnicity, tradition, and religious freedom intertwined. Some tribes were Christian, others Hindu, still others followed tribal beliefs. Ethan Reed was deeply drawn to this complex and diverse culture, which couldn't be clearly categorized. After changing buses several times, and even hitchhiking in the back of a truck when there were no buses, he finally entered a village. Rarely seen by foreigners, small, simple houses were scattered amidst the magnificent natural scenery of mountains and valleys. Chickens and goats roamed near the village entrance, and children ran barefoot on the dirt paths when Ethan Reed appeared. With his backpack, dozen safe eyes turned to him simultaneously. He felt nervous, but also a warm curiosity. After a few steps, the owner of a humble tea stall near the village entrance beckoned him to sit down, peppered a strong cup of chai, and asked, In broken English where he was from and why was there, Ethan Reed briefly introduced himself. The owner smiled brightly and said he knew a young man who had previously guided foreigners. Asking him to wait a moment soon, a young man walked in from outside. His name was Aaron, about 30 years old. He had traveled several regions with a volunteer group. Therefore his English was quite fluent, and he offered to show. Ethan read around the area. Ethan Reed accepted his offer and asked him to find a room where he could stay in the village for a few days. He ended up staying in a simple stone house with an old woman. It had a very comfortable feel thanks to Aaron's translation. He was able to have simple conversations with the old woman. She was cheerful and treated Ethan Reed like a grandson. Thanks to her, Ethan Reed was able to learn about the unique food and culture of the region within a few days. Few days later, as Ethan Reed explored the village and became familiar with its people, he began to notice some unique customs of the area. At first he wondered, are there fewer men here? Indeed, walking through the village he saw many women and children. While men seemed relatively scarce, he cautiously asked Haran, "Yes, our village has always had a smaller male population, and many men go to serve in the military or work in the city. That's why polygyny has long been allowed here. Of course, it has mostly disappeared now, but some families still retain this tradition. Really, polygyny is allowed in India." Ethan Reed was surprised. Aaron shrugged. Some tribes in this region have long had this tradition for religious or cultural reasons. As long as it doesn't conflict with government law, they recognize these customs internally. Hearing these words, Ethan Reed's mind was in a whirl. Even in New York City, marrying multiple wives was unimaginable. But here some families still maintained this way of life. From that day on, Ethan Reed began to interact with the villagers and gradually observe their daily lives. One day, a small festival was held in the center of the village. It was said to be a traditional event held once or twice a year. Children and women in colorful traditional clothes performed singing and dancing in the local language. As Ethan Reed was happily watching, Aaron came over and offered to introduce him to his sister. Aaron's sister was named Locke, and she looked about 25. She had brown skin and striking bright large eyes. She wasn't very talkative, but when she smiled, she gave off a very warm feeling. Her English wasn't fluent, but with Aaron's help she greeted him. "My brother has told me a lot about you. You're from New York and you'll be staying here for a long time." Ethan Reed smiled shyly and nodded. "Yes, I like it here and I need a rest." Lakshmi smiled brightly. "Then please come visit our home often. In the future my mother will like you too." That's how Ethan Reed met Lakshmi and her family. Lakshmi's mother was old but neatly dressed and had a kind smile. Her father had passed away years ago. She had several siblings, but most worked in other regions and were not at home. Lakshmi and Oren lived with their family in this village. As time passed, Ethan Reed naturally chatted and laughed with Lakshmi, occasionally taking walks together. Although her English wasn't fluent, communication wasn't a big problem with Aaron's translation. Whenever he saw her meticulous thoughtfulness and quiet warmth, Ethan Reed felt comfortable. However, Ethan Reed soon realized that his presence, not only as a foreigner but also as a young man, was quite noticeable in this village with few young people. Day after the festival, as Ethan Reed walked down the street, several women glanced at him, smiled, or cautiously poked to him. Some invited him to their homes for tea, while others asked if he could help them with farm work. At first just thought it was kindness, but when he asked Aaron, he laughed and replied, "Well, have fewer young men in our village, and people are curious about outsiders. Besides, the tradition of polygyny still exists. If you're willing, it's not impossible to get married and settle down here." Get married. An outsider liked him could, but Ethan Reed was surprised, but Aaron casually replied, "You're a rare presence in this village." Indeed, in this village it was common for women to lead households because men often left the area or died young. And traditionally, a man would marry several wives and establish a family. The number of such families was decreasing, but they had not completely disappeared. Ethan Reed was faced with a situation he could never have imagined. In New York, he hadn't dated in a long time, let alone considered marriage. Buth was suddenly confronted with the possibility of marriage here. Deep down, he thought it was ridiculous, but suddenly a strange feeling that this might be an opportunity emerged. His life in New York had hit a dead end. He had resigned and no one was welcoming him back in this village. At least there was a possibility of forming a family and a community. Even the unconventional method of taking multiple wives was possible, of course. Ethan Reed himself had many doubts about whether this was truly possible, but the villagers did not find him strange. Instead, they actively afforded him convenience. Then, one evening, Ethan Reed was invited to a small bonfire gathering in Lakshmi's family's courtyard. Lakshmi and Aaron, along with some village friends, gathered to play traditional instruments and sing. Ethan Reed also awkwardly kept beat. After some drinks, the atmosphere became even livelier. Lakshmi smiled gently at Ethan Reed and said, "Brother, do you like our village? Have you ever thought about staying here?" Ethan Reed felt a curiosity and excitement in her eyes for a moment. His heart pounded. "Yes, I'm actually growing to like it more and more," he replied earnestly. Lakshmi nodded, her face slightly flushed. "My mother and siblings like you very much to if you're willing, you can live with us in this village." But at that man, Arun's words flashed through Ethan Reed's mind. Some families in this village allow polygyny. Indeed, whenever Ethan Reed walked around, women showed him affection, not just Lakshmi, but Leela, who ran the tea stall near the village square, Ani, who led the singing at the festival, and Bina, who worked part-time occasionally, tried to talk to him and looked at him curiously with their less than fluent English. They seemed to be showing not just curiosity, but also affection. As time went on, Ethan reiterally conversed with the village elders. Village elder Gandhi, in particular, told Ethan read many stories of tradition and history. This place had lived as tribes for centuries, often interacting with the outside world, and even during British colonial times, it was never fully conquered. And the tradition of polygyny arose from a culture where there weren't enough men in the past. Many men died in wars or plagues. The surviving men had to take several wives to continue the entire tribe. Ethan Reed asked, "So weren't the women sad?" Village elder Gandesi tilted his head and said it was a necessarikois. Marriage is both love and for survival and maintaining the community. He said that in modern times this system had almost disappeared, but there were still many places where it could be practiced if one wished. However, men had a great obligation to bear the responsibilities of the family. Gandesi told Ethan Reed that if he were to marry here, he might take more than one wife, which was not considered strange in their culture. Ethan Reed's heart was conflicted, but at the same time, he gradually thought, "Can I start a new life here?" About 2 months, Ethan Reed had become as familiar as a local resident. He would wake up early and work in the fields with the villagers, and when he returned home, he would eat or drink tea with them because the lifestyle here was simple and communal. Even when physically tired, Ethan Reed felt a sense of peace in his heart, unlike when he returned to New York. Then one day, Lakshmi said to Ethan Reed with a cautious expression, "Brother, my mother really likes you, and if you're willing, she wants to welcome you as part of our family." Ethan Reed's heart sank at that moment. "That was marriage," Lakshmi nodded, her face flushing. "But you know, you don't have to choose just one person. There will be other women who like you too." In fact, it wasn't just Lakshmi who said this. When Ethan Reed went to the tea stall, a woman named Leela also subtly suggested, "Men are precious in our village. I'm growing to like you more and more. To have you considered marriage?" Ethan Reed smiled, but also felt awkward. "I think I'm considering Loex," he said, and Layla sighed, unfazed, saying, "Then you can live with Loex, me and me." This might sound absurd to a New Yorker, but it wasn't so unrealistic here, and she also approached him in a similar way. On the day, Ethan Reed told classic American stories, Tuth Village Children, and she came to him in the evening and said, "You are truly kind, and you like children. I think it would be wonderful if someone like you became my husband." Ethan Reed became increasingly awkward, but as he gradually integrated into the village, he realized that these proposals were not just empty words. Can he really live here with multiple wives? Ethan Reed began to seriously consider this. If he returned to New York, he would have to find a job again, and it was likely he would return to a difficult and meaningless life. On the other hand, if he stayed here, he might be able to start a new life. But isn't this too extreme? A choice he asked himself, however. The villager's attitude was consistent. If you're okay with it, our community will welcome you. Lakshmi increasingly opened up to Ethan Reed, and Ethan Reed found it difficult to ignore the kindness of the other women. Sometimes he would ask, "If I like it, can he live with all of you?" The point was that here it wasn't a given. If you choose one person, you must give up the others. But rather, it was perfectly fine to choose multiple people eventually. Ethan Reed decided to have a serious conversation. With Loki, honestly, I like who the most, but other women are also showing me affection, and it seems to be a natural thing in this village. What hold I do loke me, was silent for a long time, then said in a soft voice we don't consider, that a sin, and I'm not opposed to our family becoming larger, but I hope we don't neglect me. You must treat the other women with the same sincerity. In our village, polygyny doesn't mean men should be treated like kings. You mistakenly respect all your wives. Lakshmi's answer was more than just permission. Ethan Reed began to understand how this community had always operated its family system, and how it had operated precisely based on mutual respect. After much deliberation, Ethan Reed made a decision all. Right, let's take a gamble on my life. This was a life he could never have imagined in New York, but here it was possible, and there were many people who needed him first, he told Lakshmi's family that he wanted to marry her. The family was overjoyed, and prepared a celebratory party. They also scummed him. If there were any other women he wished to live with, Ethan Reed hesitated, then thought of Leela and Danshi. I feel that those two have also shown me affection, and I liked them too. It was a bit awkward to say at first, but Lakshmi's mother instead showed a relieved smile and said, then go ask them to if I truly want to live with you. A few days later, Ethan Reed had serious conversations with Lakshmi, Layla, and Ani separately. In the end, all three women wanted to marry Ethan Reed and were willing to accept living together. This really going to happen? Ethan Reed could hardly believe it. He worried that the three of them would be jealous of each other, but the brides-to-be said in unison, we are accustomed to these our relationships. Cooperation is more important than jealousy. Ethan Reed did not neglect his own household chores or farm work, which was a great help. The village elders Gandazi, the village chief, and Thefamalis gathered to set the wedding date according to modern Indian government law. It might not be possible legally register everyone as married simultaneously. However, in this village they held a traditional ceremony according to tribal customs. The community would recognize it as a de facto marriage. This was the power of ancient customs that state or central governments did not strongly interfere with. On the wedding day, the entire village was immersed in a festive atmosphere. People in traditional attire played music and prepared lavish foodie-thon, red war clothes with simple yet splendid decorations, and had colorful patterns drawn on his face and the backs of his hands. Lakshmi, Leela, and Ani wore a traditional sars with floral decorations in their hair. Ethan Reed saw the three of them appear side by side and wondered if this was a dream or reality. The ceremony was held in front of an ancient large tree in the center of the village. Elders offered blessings and everyone exchanged wedding vows. Amidst blessings of the crowd, Ethan Reed successfully held the hands of the three women. He felt incredibly comfortable with Lakshmi, as if they had known each other forever, shared pleasant smiles with Lila, and communicated sincere affection. Tawny through just their eyes, he who once felt the word marriage is out of reach was alive. Now about to marry three wives here, life truly was unpredictable. After the wedding, dancing and singing continued late into the night. Ethan Reed swore he would never forget this day. At the same time, deep in his heart, he thought, this is just the beginning. Even though undertaking the responsibility of caring for his new wives would be a huge challenge at Washapaning. After the marriage, Ethan Reed began living with his new wives in Ahus on the outskirts of the village. Lakshmi felt a little sad about leaving her family, but she wanted to build a new home with Ethan Reed. Lila and Ani were also happy to come and live together in Thea's house. Initially, preparing furniture and daily necessities was a big task. The villagers helped each other, sharing utensils and furniture. The new wives each took on their roles. Lakshmi was mainly responsible for cooking, sewing, and preparing traditional food. Layla ran a tea stall in the village market, earning money on, occasionally taught children, including children from other families, and earned some pocket money. Ethan Reed took on farming and house repair work in the village. He also helped foreign travelers with English communication. In this way, everyone helped maintain their livelihood in their own way and shared household chores. Although it was hard, strangely, there was a sense of unity in the evenings. The four of them would gather for meals and laugh as they talked of Boothdays events. As some days they would be sweating from Lakshmi's spicy dishes. Other days Layla would tell them an interesting story she heard from customers at the tea stall. After finishing chores, Ani would quietly read or tell Ethan Reed ancient stories of Booth Village. At first he worried about jealousy or conflict, but the wives got along surprisingly well. They resolved issues through conversation, and when Anna Femme said, "I'm going for a walk with Ethan Reed today," the others would readily agree, "Okay, have fun." And respected each other. Ethan Reed, not neglecting his share of household chores or farm work, also helped greatly. Of course, they were not entirely without conflicts. For instance, if Ethan Reed spent a night with Laxmi, Leela, or Anshi might feel a little lonely in such cases, Ethan Reed would be careful and try to give everyone similar time and attention in rotation. The wives would also look out for each other, making sure no one felt left out. "I'll mind the shop for my sister today, you go for a walk with Ethan Reed." Sometimes, when economically difficult times came, Ethan Reed felt anxious. "I really support my family with 3 wives instead of 1. However, this village had a strong sense of community. If food was scarce, they would share with neighbors, and if there was an emergency, the village elders would provide help. When Ethan Reed fell ill, the wives took turns caring for him and brought herbal remedies from the village hall. And all living together was their most important philosophy. A few months after marriage, Ethan Reed was no longer an outsider. He was recognized as a formal resident and participated in village activities and decision-making processes. For example, could offer opinions on how to build a new irrigation canal or how to decorate for village festivals. He sometimes used his English and experience from New York to propose creative ideas that surprised the villagers. For instance, he suggests building small accommodation facilities for foreign backpackers. The scenery and culture here are unique, so if tourists come, it can help the village economy. The elders and the village chief were skeptical at first, but they decided to trust Ethan Reed's sincerity and enthusiasm. Eventually, a project to expand the tea stall and build a guest room in the backyard began. Layla was in charge of operations, and Ani taught tourists traditional dances and songs. Laxmi started a cooking class, teaching them how to make local traditional dishes. As a result, rumors slowly spread online, and adventurous tourists began to arrive from overseas. Thus, Ethan Reed gradually became Samiana, dedicated not only to his family, but to the entire village. The villagers also treated him as their own family in this caring community. Ethan Reed savored a sense of belonging and accomplishment that he had never felt in New York. At some point, Ethan Reed started to consider having children. The wives also hoped to have children one day. In fact, as time passed, Laxmi announced she was pregnant. Ethan Reed's heart pounded. "I'm really going to be a father?" He felt a sense of responsibility, him and a touch of fear all at once. The entire village celebrated the news of the pregnancy. "You're finally going to truly build a family." They said Leela and Ani were not jealous. Instead, they took even better care of Laxmi. A few months later, Laxmi gave birth to a healthy child. The village women gathered as midwives, and when Ethan Reed first held the baby's tiny hand, he felt a rush of emotion. He had become the father of a life in this unfamiliar land. It was a precious moment that nothing in the world could replace. Subsequently, Ani and Leela also experienced pregnancies and childbirth. More and more children filled the family, and the house was always full of their laughter in the evenings. Ethan Reed and his new wives would lull the children to sleep, then gather in the courtyard quietly gazing at festers. "We never imagined our lives would turn out like this," Ethan Reed's words made Lakmela and Ani laugh simultaneously, "but we are very happy now." That single sentence said it all. This was a rural area with little to no internet or phone service. Sometimes Ethan Reed would go to the city to check emails and catch up on his friends back home. Some friends would ask, "When are you coming back? How are you going to find a job?" Others would jokingly ask, "Did you get married?" Ethan Reed swallowed hard and sighed. He wasn't just married, he was living with 3 wives. How could he possibly tell them he wasn't ready for the world to know, yet anticipating prejudice and shock? Sometimes he would think of his parents. They had passed away, so there was no way to tell them the news. But if they were alive, how would they react? "My son is living in a rural Indian village with 3 wives and children. His father, who had worked in finance his entire life, would surely faint." Time passed, and Ethan Reed's family gradually settled into the village. The guest house found modest success and became a stable source of income, and their fields and livestock gradually expanded. The wives helped each other raise the children. Ethan Reed occasionally introduced the history and culture of the village to visit interests. Meanwhile, with the increase in new visitors, the village gradually odors. One autumn evening, Ethan Reed stood on a small hill in the village watching the sunset. He heard the sounds of children playing, crying, and running. After a while, his wives walked up and sat beside him. Laxmi quietly took Ethan Reed's hand. Layla laughed and said, "What should we eat tonight?" And Annie pointed at the children, shouting, "You guys be careful." The last rays of the settings and painted the faces of the three women, and Ethan Reed read his life in New York flash through his mind. The daily despair of wanting to escape the company, the endless nights, the humiliation and competition, and himself, trapped within it all. But now it felt like a very distant story. Now living in a small Indian village with 3 wives and children, that was real life. Of course, life here was not always romantic. Natural disasters, illnesses, or economic hardships might come, and there would still be conflicts or trials. But Ethan Reed believed that, with this community, Tat had accepted him and the wives who acknowledged and cooperated with each other, they would surely overcome any difficulties. The red sun slowly disappeared below the horizon, and stars began to emerge in Neski. Ethan Reed gently put his arm around each of his wife's shoulders in turn and said, "I am truly fortunate to be with all of you." Laxmi, Layla, and Anshalad in unison, and replied, "We are too." The night in the distant foreign land deepened, and in Ethan Reed's eyes a quiet realization of how beautiful life truly was emanated once more.